So it's now time for the panel. I'm going to introduce you before they come on. So we've got Rachel Colby-Samoon. Rachel is the head of sustainable sourcing and nature initiatives at Kering. I'm sure you all know Kering because we're in Paris, but if you don't, Kering brands include Gucci, Yves Saint Laurent, Balenciaga, Alexander McQueen, and many, many more. So this is Rachel, head of sustainable sourcing. Next we have Mathilde Mignon. Mathilde works at EcoAct, which is an international sustainability consultancy headquartered in Paris, and she is the group director of nature and tech-based solutions. Lastly, we have Farwiza, or Wiza Farhan. Wiza is a forest conservationist working to restore, protect, and conserve the Losa ecosystem, which is a rainforest in Sumatra, the largest island in Indonesia. The Losa ecosystem is the last place on Earth where rhinos, tigers, elephants, and orangutans still roam together in the wild. So please give them a big round of applause. So, I feel like we're all quite far away from each other, but it's fine. We can make up for it with intimate conversation. So just to say, the way I like to do panels is nice and spontaneous. So that means it's a dialogue. So if I ask a question to one person, but someone else has something to say, feel free to chime in. Dialogue rather than monologue. So Mathilde, I was going to start with you. Nature does so many things for us, but I don't think we don't think about its value in financial terms. Why is it important that we do that?
Thank you. Can you hear me? Thank you, Maeve. Thank you very much, and hi, everyone. So nature has like financial terms. So basically, the reflection that we need to have here is that we are asking and we are waiting for massive investment into nature. So the way I want to start like thinking about this reflection is on a business perspective. How do we engage the business, and then go back to what makes sense for businesses. So if we take only one number, basically, which is from the World Economic Forum, what they say is that if we, like the World Economic Forum estimates that if we have like an improved stewardship of natural capital, we could actually like really improve the way we work with nature and we manage nature, sort of. We could actually unlock $10 trillion annually in business opportunities. So basically, not only nature helps that business prosperity, but we are also dependent on nature. And conversation side, I will definitely like give the floor to Kering and to Rachel to talk about like how do we need nature. But for me, it's really a reflection on it's part of like it's linked to our business prosperity, and it's definitely important in the way that we are going to make decisions as part of a company. Yeah. If we want corporates to get involved in the Paris Agreement efforts, we need to sort of like speak their language to make it like very easy. And to speak their language means like integrating within their framework, integrating this like financial aspect. They need to invest in the reduction, like in reducing their emission. But in the same time, if we want to invest in nature, we need those framework, and those framework will help them like make decision in investments.
Yeah.
And maybe one thing on this about numbers. Why do we need to use those financial terms? Sort of like, is because basically we are the crucial challenge here in this debate about nature is that we need to scale up those investments. We are not where we are. Basically, financial terms, we need, and developing countries, they need $1 trillion annually to reach their needs. And countries are only mobilizing 300 billion annually. So this shortfall isn't just a number.
Yeah.
It's basically climate solution left unfunded. It's communities left vulnerable. It's emission continuing not to be abated. So basically, we need those investments to be able to reach the Paris Agreement objectives.
So Rachel, what do you think? It's nature is, according to Mathilde, a climate solution left unfunded. Do you think that by putting a price tag on nature by viewing it through financial terms, it will better help us to protect it rather than exploit it?
So I don't know if saying price tag is the right word, because that might be what's causing confusion in terms of whether it's ethical to think that we should actually put a price tag on nature. But if we do take it from a business perspective, what we can be sure of is that there are very clearly calculable ecosystem services that absolutely are so useful to so many. And these ecosystem services, sometimes they happen just naturally. Sometimes they happen thanks to land stewardship done by humans, all sorts of humans, local communities or farmers, etc. And I think that putting value on that as what are the systems and the services that help us, and when we preserve those systems or we preserve other areas, the actual asset that entails.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like the sun has come out just to blind us.
No, it's to say that it's right. We're spot on.
On a nature panel, it's very apt. But excuse me if I look blind, because I'm struggling. So Rachel, I'm really interested because obviously you work for Kering. Kering, owns multiple fashion brands that we've all heard of. I imagine that you're sourcing a lot of cotton, a lot of wool from around the world. Looking down your supply chain, how do you make sure that you're working with and not against nature all over the world?
So, thanks for this question, because it's true that it's been very important for Kering for a long time. As many of you probably know, we've been using the environmental profit and loss statement, so the EPNL, for over 10 years now, to be really clear on exactly what are the impacts and dependencies that we have on the different areas, whether it be water pollution, greenhouse gases, land use. And we've put an economic factor on that to have a clearer sense of what is that cost to others, and what does that mean, and how does that denote what our responsibility is to do that. So it's something that's very close to us, but then there's an additional element that we're increasingly aware of because the consequences of climate change are becoming so visible. We're starting to realize that there is a real resilience issue. When we look at this environmental profit and loss for us, we know that about 2/3 of it is on agriculture.
Okay.
You're talking about wool. This is a beautiful wool suit by Alexander McQueen.
Would you like to model it for everyone?
Right. Yeah, here we go.
A lovely wool suit.
I don't know how to model exactly, but and it's sustainable wool. Because what we've done is we've gone both ways. We've gone from our stores up the value chain, but then when we realized that sometimes you can get maybe organic or most of the time conventional, how can we actually spark being able to get what would be regenerative? I was listening to a very interesting talk this morning by Marc-André Sellos, who was explaining that organic is good, but it's really not going to help us in terms of getting those ecosystemic services in place. And that's why actually going toward regenerative agriculture is going to enable having the quality of the soils that are going to create that resilience and help adapt to climate change. So we started the Regenerative Fund for Nature back in 2021 to actually work within our value chains, including wool, to help the farmers be able to transition towards the kind of practices that would enable that supply chain to grow. And it's interesting, we chose to do a fund because the idea is that this can't be done by just one actor. We actually all have to group together, sort of align the way that we're moving forward, and have it a way where there's a great momentum that builds. And from there, then working on this value chain traceability, both up and down, we can be sure that there's even a better benefit sharing, for example. So that when we talk about resilience, of course, resilience is not only environmental, it's also very much socioeconomic. And we have to be sure that the farmers are going to be paid for the valuable services they render. And it's bringing it all together that it actually makes it that we can continue providing this type of quality garments for people.
And by having a regenerative fund, does that mean that the cost isn't brought onto the consumer? It's a philanthropic fund, or?
It's a philanthropic fund.
Yeah.
But actually, increasingly, we're trying to really work with the grantees. We have about 12 projects in 8 different countries on also leather and cashmere are the 2 other commodities. And we work with the grantees, and some are in this room, actually, to see how do we go beyond philanthropy. Because philanthropy, we might think of it as a seed capital for jump-starting and initiating some regenerative practices. But what we really need to do is to build it to the actual economic system that works for the different stakeholders who are involved.
Yeah.
So we're looking to see solutions like what Jamie was talking about earlier. How can we actually show that value? And that gets into a lot of fuzzy areas that we are accustomed to not knowing how to calculate. How do you calculate the well-being of a person? When you say you improve a farmer's livelihoods, how do you actually calculate that out? And who should be helping to pay for those benefits? Should it be the health ministry because there's fewer public health issues? Or when you even look at the types of environmental ecosystemic services that they're providing, and that we know that the healthier soil is going to help manage the water, the rainfall that's following after too much drought. And we're going to avoid the kinds of floods that we just saw in Valencia, where there are factories that have nothing to do with farming who lost considerable amounts of money and had their assets damaged. Who should be paying into this stewardship? Because just how vast of a number of different types of stakeholders are actually benefiting when we do make these steps towards a more healthier ecosystem.
Absolutely, it's a great question. Who should be paying in? Weeza, I want to turn to you. Do you have an answer to that question? Who do you think should be paying for the nature restoration? You know, you live in one of the most biodiverse landscapes in the world, and you see the impacts on the ground, I'm sure. Tell us your thoughts.
I mean, of course, that's a difficult question, truly, who should be paying? And in so many ways, we tend to pass on the responsibility of who should be paying to those that do have resources. Sometimes I tend to think that commodification of nature could be a dangerous path. In one way, sure, we need to think about economic opportunity for those in the grassroots when you compare initiatives like conservation that maybe does not bring direct economic benefits, and intervention like exploitation that may bring immediate economic benefits, but then long-term consequences in so many ways. And if I think about landscape where I worked in the Loiser ecosystem in Sumatra, a lot of people might know Aceh as one of that province that got impacted by 2004 tsunami that impacted Thailand, Sumatra, India, Sri Lanka. But very few knows a year later, there's another tsunami from the mountain that happened to the people on the East Coast. That was a huge flash flood that destroyed almost entire district.
When was that?
2005.
Right.
And the economic consequences of that flash flood was equal to the provincial budget for a year. So when we think of investing in nature, like it or not, we will be paying when we're not investing in nature. When flash and landslide and every natural disaster have an economic consequences. Yeah. So really, there has been a whole lot of calculation. There has been a lot of science that goes into this. We have been warned for many decades about the need to invest in nature, but the world somehow is not necessarily ready to move in that direction. And also, sometimes when we think about creating payment for ecosystem services project or a carbon project, there is an exclusivity and trade-off that we are locking the land and the area away from the grassroots communities who have been using that areas for generations. So are we doing this in the right way? Are we thinking about it in a just and sustainable manner? Sorry to throw more questions back at you.
No, very interesting. I mean, it's always nice to end with a question. That leads me on, I'm thinking of two things. One, you say, we've known about this for so long, but we don't seem to be addressing it. Mathilde, you work with companies at your consultancy in Paris. from my experience, I don't know if you'd agree, I think climate seems to be more trendy than nature. You know, everyone, you know, people seem to understand about carbon emissions, but they don't seem to be as on board with nature initiatives. Have you found that in your work? And if so, how do you galvanize companies to put nature at the forefront of their commercial strategies?
It's an interesting question because the idea is not to oppose climate and nature.
No.
Obviously, it goes together and one is helping the other. So it's interesting to see when they are separated into corporates while it's actually, and I guess you're actually tackling both. So basically, you're talking about the project and like how you're working in some like very vulnerable regions and how like we need those investments in those regions. At EcoAct, we help organizations that are far away sometimes from those regions to understand how they could invest in those projects and how they can link all of those activities, because you said you cannot invest, but at some point you will pay. That's the point. And I really like that point because basically what we're trying to explain to corporates is like you have to obviously reduce within your value chain, invest in your value chain to try to reduce as much as you can within your scope of activity, within your core business. But you need to invest outside. And when we think outside, we think climate and nature globally. Basically, as project developer, we work on different type of projects. And let's take, for example, one type of project. We are developing like a mangrove project, so project restoration, where we will preserve and restore mangrove forest. We will doing the same with forestry. We're working on like energy efficiency, etc. And you can think about the different tools that are helping the emission sequestration, but they are also helping nature. Yeah. Basically, when you think about mangroves, you're not only trying to sequester, and for mangrove it's like 5 times more than like any tropical forest when you actually plant mangrove trees. Mm-hmm. You are also creating habitat for like birds, and you're also like creating a habitat that are going to create more resources for like fishermen and for people like living from those like natural habitats. So basically we always see them together as we develop nature-based solution. Yeah. We are a developer of nature-based solution, so type of projects, but in those nature we will account for the carbon that we remove or that we reduce from or that we avoid from the atmosphere, and we will look at all of those like other SDGs. Yeah. And so climate action, SDG 13, goes with 15 and 14.
Go hand in hand.
Life on land, life below water. So all of those goes together.
Yeah. I appreciate that it's much more of a holistic approach. I think that's definitely the right way to go. And Rachel and Louisa, I want you to both just come in here. I want to make sure that we're talking about long-term nature restoration when we talk about this, because you're living in the ecosystem. I'm sure you see when people come in and make projects that are have a shelf life and they don't last too long. I think when it comes to investing money into nature restoration, investors usually want quick wins and short returns. So what does a return on investment in nature look like, Rachel?
Well, for us, because we are nature dependent, I guess the long-term investment just makes a lot of sense, which is why we're trying always to get ever closer to our farmers, to recognize the efforts that they're making, help them along in that transition, because if we don't do that, we won't have the materials that we need for our own business. And so above and beyond the responsibility that we have at Caring, we think that it's just good business sense. Yeah. So for the long-term investment, it makes sense. And it also, what we're looking at increasingly, we're working a lot on nature positive and water positive, et cetera. And we realize that you're talking about landscapes. We have to go above and beyond just the plots that we're working on. A plot is going to do well because it's the neighboring land or water bodies are also doing well. There's a continuum within nature that is sometimes forgotten about. So we're going to, just as we tend to isolate variables or we try to make everything quite linear, we're sort of doing the same thing to nature, and maybe that's to Louisa's point, when in fact we have to consider what are these interdependencies and linkages, and how do we work on that whole ensemble. And I guess that's why I was trying to bring forth this idea of who should pay, because it's not to to say that we shouldn't pay, we should, and we do. But then who are the additional beneficiaries who should also recognize those services they're benefiting from? Because if we don't have everybody pay, then nobody even realizes the benefits and the actual value that is there for them.
And what does everybody pay look like? Do we all need to pay in this room? Do we all need to pay for nature? How can we do that?
Well, I think that there are little bits here and there that are being tried out, like working with water utilities companies who realize that when the farming is improved and they have a more regenerative approach, then they're actually going to have incredible savings when it comes to their own purification needs. So there are some of these ecosystemic services that are now fairly well recognized in more and more countries, and I think this is the type of idea. So a public utility oftentimes is going to be on tax money. Well, it's interesting to see how much of that money can and should be allotted to helping that transition of the farm, so that then suddenly you have, of course, caring, buying something from the farmers with an improved price, and we're recognizing the good work they're doing. Then other types of commodities those farmers are also doing who are also carried forward by other actors as well. But then, third circle, the larger impacts of the way the basin is being improved, so that that road doesn't have to be cleaned up because the land hasn't eroded and then now blocked the traffic in that road because of the poor soils. So we really see that I think we have to bring to light that those real savings.
Yeah, and the connections.
And the connections.
Yeah.
What I'm still struggling with, though, I have to admit, this is our big thing that we're working on now, is how do we show the creation of value?
Yeah.
So you talk about long-term, we can talk about how we're going to make a supply chain resilient. You talk about long-term, and we can talk about how we're going to help adapt to climate change. We can talk about how we mitigate risk and actually act on those risks. And all of that is a long-term return. But for the short term, there are other questions. And this is where I think we have to be really innovative to think about who is actually going to see that value creation in a more immediate way.
Yeah.
So suddenly we think this means that we don't want just one financial pathway. We actually have to embrace the diversity of different types of financial profiles. Different ones who are going to have a different risk appetite, who are going to have a different expectation in terms of return. Maybe they want a bigger return, but they're prepared to have a grace period for 5 years before they start bringing that in.
Yeah.
That could be just enough time to get over the valley of the way farmers can actually transition to regenerative.
Yeah.
And if we take biodiversity literally, and we say that in any of our systems, if we want them to be viable, we have to have that same biodiversity.
Yeah.
And so we have to have that same diversification of corporates, but diversification of financial institutional players, and build with that type of mosaic.
So what would you say to the audience, just as a last word, if you were to spread the word and say to corporates or businesses in this room one thing they could do for nature, what would it be?
Oh. Okay. Work with your neighbors.
Okay, great. Mathilde?
Yeah, work with your neighbors.
Reduce and invest now, because 2050 is tomorrow.
Okay, 2050 is tomorrow. Love that. Weezer?
Well, I actually would like to extend an invitation to open your heart. When you think about economy and nature and the climate and the planet, more like allowing yourself to see yourself as part of the solutions. Because really, when I think about conservation, sometimes people have always thought conservation is such an exclusive club, but in reality, all of us enjoy the benefits that the ecosystem is giving us. Why not all of us take part in protecting it, restoring it, conserving it?
Thank you so much. Please give my panel a big round of applause. Thank you so much.
Thank you.